Leah, how was your trip to Portugal? I know you were just there talking to a bunch of other folks about PLG. What was the vibe?
Yeah, it was pretty good. It was pretty good. I really love these dedicated conferences, like where you speak really about one particular topic and it's not just like everybody from tech. I don't have anything against these kind of types of events, but you like one of them means you can be more specific about topics. The other one is like you're being more broad. So I enjoy stuff like these AMAs where we are already like in a specific segment. I don't have to explain what a SaaS company does. So so
Yeah.
so that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, everyone's a part of the club and we all know the secret codes.
Yeah, we know the secret codes. We all pretend that we know how growth works,
And we
me
just throw
included.
we throw acronyms around and just, obfuscate.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, I'm an abbreviation connoisseur.
I
I,
would expect nothing less from the PLG PLS expert herself.
exactly.
Awesome. Well, it's great to see everybody, and we'll give other folks a couple minutes to trickle in here. But while they are doing that, some housekeeping items. If you have questions as Leah and I are chatting today, please add them to the chat. We'll kind of pause at a few moments to get your Q&A in. This is your time to ask Leah all of your questions. We do these AMAs for the community monthly as an opportunity to have like a really unvarnished conversation about a specific topic, and we bring in experts like Leah to share their knowledge as well. So this is really your time to ask all of your burning questions, and we'll try and get to as many of them as possible. We do only have 45 minutes, and the clock is ticking. So if we don't get to your question, we'll do our best to follow up after this chat. All right. To get us started, I'm going to intro our lovely guest Leah here, and then I'm going to turn it over to her to give us a little more color on her background. And then I'm going to kick us off with a few questions before I turn it over to the community. So Leah is an incredible person, but more than that, she is a product-led sales and product-led growth expert. She's a leading growth advisor for scaling B2B companies that are focused on product-led growth and product-led sales. And the reason why she's such a credible source is she spent the over 2 decades in tech and has led both growth initiatives and product teams to really kind of put her expertise to the test. She's translated all of that into a career as, I know the term influencer is controversial, so I'll say solopreneur, who writes on Substack about product-led growth and product-led sales, as well as hosts a podcast called ProductTea. And if any of you have been on LinkedIn, you've probably seen a lot of Leah's awesome content and frameworks. Leah, what did I miss?
Absolutely nothing. This was perfect. This is the main reason why I joined these talks to get, like some kind of summary of myself. And it sounds really amazing. I want to meet that person. That is really cool.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I mean, to kick us off, I thought maybe we could just spend a little bit of time talking about those 2 decades working in tech at various startups. Most recently, you were head of product at Jua.ai, and before that, Small PDF, where you got to, have a lot of fun with over, is it 50 million monthly active users?
Yeah.
That's awesome. Tell us a little bit more about that and how you went from, those operator roles to now being an advisor and really kind of writing about growth.
I'll try to keep this as entertaining as possible. And so it needs to be also a little bit short. I guess I started in 1998. I always like going back one millennia where I started as an engineer. And then I realized that I was pretty bad at it. Started to pivot into UX design, which we called web designer. So that meant I had to do everything, like the animated GIFs, analyzing everything through Google Analytics or like Google that came up back then. And yeah, but for the better part of the beginning of my career, I was a UX engineer, UX researcher, that kind of stuff. So that was my focus. I founded 4 startups in my life. One of them is still alive. One of them I exited this year. The other 2 I crashed into the wall, and pretty gloriously, I want to add as well. And yeah, but I think the most important part of my career was that at some point I wanted to go into product because I was frustrated by all the things that I kind of started to figure out with research are wrong, but could not change. And product management is really perfect for me because also earlier in my career, I did not want to manage people, but I wanted to manage problems. And that was definitely one thing that I enjoyed quite a lot. And product management is really an underappreciated art, I think, because if you're doing it right, you don't have to deal with all the annoying stuff that is coming from managing people, but you can still influence something in a product that then other people are using. And yeah, that was pretty much that. And I think I was extremely fortunate to be an early employee in 2 hyper-growth startups. The first one turned me off from startups. The second one turned me on to startups again. So it is always quite difficult to kind of have some extreme experience in your career. And then you kind of think that everything runs this way because you're almost shell-shocked, for a lack of a better word. And yeah, but I was always coming from product, which is a very interesting thing. And I also know that you have some questions about that. But ultimately, I'm always drawn to scaling companies, which means you also need to know about growth a lot. You need to know about marketing. You need to know about sales. And at some point, I got so big on LinkedIn through all the writing and all the stuff that I did when I overcame my imposter syndrome for the first time, that it made no sense to have a full-time job. Let's put it that way. Like I had so much inbound and optionality from other companies that I just said, this is what I'm doing now as a full-time job. So I started to layer this in a year ago, and now I'm doing it full-time. Yeah.
That's incredible. What a journey that's been. I really there's a couple things you said there that I could dive into, but the one I want to focus in on is the fact that you are a, by trade product leader, but you're so go-to-market focused and growth focused. Tell us a little bit about kind of why developing that skill set is important, how you developed it, and how that kind of, manifests in the work that you do.
So I am someone that is always very frustration driven in some ways, right? So like frustration is always like triggering something, and then I make a big decision in my life. I think the first one was when I changed to product, as I said, I want to solve problems. And if you are a product manager in Europe, or you've ever worked with those, there's a high chance that you're more treated like a project manager. So someone that is trying to kind of execute. And I always had the trouble that product management in the way that we know it today, and also the way that I write about it, was not so much data-driven. It was more execution-driven. Scrum came up 10 years ago. It was all the rage, right? Like, here's how we do the processes. Here's how we do customer interviews, all of that kind of stuff. And for some reason, there was always this kind of missing link to data. I just really wanted to understand things. And I think when I got into A/B testing, and which is a main domain of growth, and understanding how you can actually measure the things that lead to revenue without talking about revenue, so customer success or how much people are using your product, then things start to make sense. And I really had this coming to truth moment, I would say, about 2 years ago, when I started to really read about all the frameworks on Reforge, or it must have been maybe even 3 years ago, like on Reforge about growth and so forth. And I could discard a lot of the frameworks that I just believed, but never really understood. And I'm someone that writes a lot from a first principles perspective. So you will very rarely catch me with just throwing a framework at your feet without explaining you exactly why it works the way that it does, because this was my biggest frustration. And growth has this beautiful thing about it, that it is extremely measurable. And it's probably the hardest discipline that you can have, because there's just you cannot hide. And that's what I really, really enjoy about it.
I love that. And I think that's so important to kind of realize in almost every function that you should be thinking about experiments, making things, like, not everything can be measured, but making things as measurable as possible so that you're driving towards like the truth, as opposed to, building products, building go-to-markets based on your tummy feelings, as opposed to kind of what's actually happening. Switching gears a little bit, I actually want to talk about kind of how you like started in this like product-led growth space. If you could talk a little bit about specific examples of the companies that you worked with and how you first came to like learn about PLG, and maybe it wasn't even called that back then. But tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a very good point about the fact that it wasn't called PLG. So I always have to fight with people about, yeah, but we've been doing PLG for 30 years. It depends on the kind of definition that you have for it. Like try before you buy. Okay, yeah, that's not a new concept. Of course, we all understand that. But I think I was the first thing that I really did that is unequivocally PLG in B2B was a product-led sales pipeline for Sunrise. So what we tried to do is we tried to really bring data to sales, which this is often about. And for the product-led part in this is that instead of trying to bringing pipeline data to sales, what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring engagement data from users. How do they use the products? Is this more of an indicative or like, is this more of an indication than just firmographics, for instance? Like if we only focus on company sizes, whether we know who is the buyer in that company and that kind of stuff, right? So like we're flying relatively blind in terms of like whether our customers are loving our stuff. Then I started to notice a couple of friction points in there and wanted to know more, right? So like I always came with this idealistic approach of like, okay, I know how it has to look at the end, but then I still ran into some friction points inside of a company. So like if you want to do product-led sales in a company, whether you're a sales leader or whether you're a product person, does not matter. You're going to run into a lot of trouble if you're in a sales-led organization. It is very, very difficult to push through this politically in some way. All people hear is that, oh, we are going to cannibalize our revenue. This is just a fad. You're just trying this out. You're just trying to do this. You're just trying to, like, you're crazy. And I had to learn relatively hard that this is not a problem that you can solve through product or through sales or through marketing. You need to do it through leadership. And I had a fantastic boss at Small PDF, Mike Pilowski, who was my CPO, who really, really unlocked me. And he was very challenging. He was very brutal to me also sometimes in the sense of like, he said, like, look, what you're doing here is total garbage. You can do so much more. And he was challenging me all on a lot of topics, like when we were trying to get partnerships with Miro going and the way that we thought about growth, but he never blocked us. He always said, like, look, if you really believe in it, then you can go with it and then you can do it. And I mean, this is kind of the thing. When things are becoming measurable, you can take some of the emotion out. And that is extremely important. That is extremely important. Like take the emotion out, make it measurable, and then take it from there. And that was for me the biggest unlock. And we grew from 2 million ARR to 30 in about 2 years as a result of it. So like we became extremely efficient also with the traffic that we had. Yeah.
That's awesome. You said a lot of things there. I want to dive into a few more points before I turn it over to the community selfishly. So you mentioned, there's like that leadership alignment required. When is the right time to go and like get that leadership buy-in? Is it before you've run a few experiments and you want to get the right to run those experiments? Or is it after you've run a few experiments and then you want to go and take the numbers to them? And then what are some of the ways that you've seen be most effective in getting that alignment and buy-in? Because I'm assuming it's also alignment across like several different leaders, like sales, head of product, head of whoever, RevOps.
So I have a very hot take on this. And so let's go with first principles. How do you get buy-in for anything that is above your pay grade? Let's put it that way, because that is usually what you have to do. Unless you are the CEO, and unless you've drunken the Kool-Aid and you're already following Leah, then you probably don't know too much about PLG. The fundamental question that you have to ask yourself in any of these positions is, how much on a scale from 1 to 10 do I know what's important to the VP of sales, to the VP of product, or whoever you have as a head of, and to marketing? Do I really understand what they need? And most people cannot answer this because they only know what's going on in their own department. So when you start to stomp to the CPO or like to the CEO or to whoever is going to drive this particular initiative, and it's usually the CEO, unless you're in a really big scale up where growth is really separated. If you go in there and you do not know what the other head ofs are being measured on and what is important to them, you have absolutely no chance. Absolutely zero. And one of the reasons for this is that inherently, these things that I said in a funny tone before are becoming quite serious for sales. When you march into a company and you tell the RevOps leader, hey, we're going to change how we do incentivization, because that's what you're essentially telling them. We have a cheaper pricing. We're going to change how we are paying salespeople. So you're not going to get money on the quota anymore. You're going to get it on the expansion. You're threatening someone's livelihood. You're telling someone how to run their shop. And if you're in a company that doesn't do product-led sales yet, then you have probably leaders in the company who are not used to product-led sales or product-led growth in the first place. So you need to kind of engineer this, and you need to understand, okay, if I'm changing any of this, or if I want to get buy-in, then I need to really understand what is important to all of them. And that means you need to do a lot of homework first. So you need to understand what's important. How can and I don't want to say dismantle these concerns, because some of them are very valid, because we will also probably have some questions on like, how do you not cannibalize your own enterprise segment when you come in and you say like, hey, we should do freemium and we should offer everything for $5 a month. You need to do your homework. And this is what kills me so much. You have so many great product people who are going easily out to customers and to users and talk with them every day, maybe once a day. The best ones are doing it almost daily, but they don't do it internally. And this is a big mistake. You need to understand how your company runs. And that's the first thing. So then the other thing is, I always was creating business cases for everything. So specifically about product-led growth, anything that we did in small PDF as well, whether it was a growth initiative or whether it was a big throw that we did for product, it didn't really matter. You need to tie it to the company's strategy. And then you need to say like, look, this is the kind of uplift that we can get. And here are the milestones that we can go where we see maybe initial signs of success or failure and so forth. So creating this particular business case is unfortunately what it takes. If you don't do this, then you are depending on whether anyone in the C-level is motivated enough to do it for you. And I learned something in my career, like if you want to get up the ladder, you don't want someone else to take these steps. You have to be bold and you have to make these cases. And by the way, they don't need to be this crazy, right? So like most business cases that you see are probably guesswork anyways. So people are unnecessarily intimidated about them. Most of the points that you have in a business case is that did you do your homework and did you think about what is going to happen in the company? Because we can still challenge them. Doesn't mean that this is the way that it's going to happen. Yeah, I'm not sure whether that answered the question, but this is probably the most important thing.
Yeah, no, it did. And it actually leads nicely into the question Brandon asked in the chat, which is, like broadly advice you would give to exec teams that are evaluating PLG. I think that's also what would go into that business case. It's like, why are we doing this? So could you talk a little bit about kind of what the attributes you should be looking for that kind of make your company ripe for doing PLG? And then actually, I would love to also talk about the converse, which is as a PLG company, when do you know it's time to add a sales function and start moving up market?
So you touched on a lot of good points, and I hope I'm not missing any of those. So there's fundamentally 2 or like 3 different motions in how you do product-led growth. You either do it as a new company, and then you it sounds a bit counterintuitive because you start without growth, but you're already creating your product to be self-serve, and then you can, you go through this entire SaaS segment and so forth. But like, let's just put this to the side. Or you're coming from this kind of sales-led driven approach. You're fully sales-led, and now you want to do product-led growth. Or so you're going most of the time either down market, or you want to protect yourself from the commoditization that is rolling towards you, because this is something that has been happening for a lot of companies. Their markets are not protected anymore. A lot of other companies are coming in with equal solutions, with undercutting pricing. You see other people in the pitches and so forth. So whether you're doing it from top down or bottoms up, like drastically changes the approach. Drastically changes the approach. I'm not sure on which one I want to touch first, because probably with the easier one first. So the easier way to do product-led growth is if you're doing it, or like product-led sales, or like if you want to layer in sales into any existing function, is if you're doing it upmarket, because you already have an existing revenue base, you already have a product that has been tested with hundreds of thousands of users, maybe sometimes. And you start to have your odd inbound leads that are asking like, hey, do you also have group deals? Can you give us a special pricing for 5,000 people or something like this, whatever, like this is the ideal scenario. It is very hard to not do some kind of form of sales in this particular scenario because you already have a running business case. This is happening so many times, specifically if you have a B2B product, of course. The good thing there, and this is a very important kind of play that you need to be aware of, if you started as a B2C company and you have as much reach as we had at Small PDF, you have way more leads than what you can take care of potentially. You don't know yet how to qualify them, but you have a lot of leads, right? So like you could spend your day, the entire day on your phone, right? So like if you just put in like a lead generation, like a form up there and you say like, okay, this is how we generate leads, you probably get a lot of unqualified garbage. So you have about 200 leads every day. Most of them are not even B2B clients, but you could be on the phone all day. And that is a very important precursor for product-led sales. And also one of the main reasons why it is so hard to do product-led growth after you're a sales-led growth company. And I want to touch on why this is the case, because this is something that people oftentimes forget. Just to close this loop on what you do if you go upmarket. Usually you have someone from the company that is installing HubSpot. It's what I did, right? So like I brought B2B into Small PDF. I got HubSpot in, bought a lot of stock when they were cheap as well, because I loved what they were doing. And then you kind of learn on the job, right? But you're not dependent. So the business is not dependent. It's almost like it's a different kind of initiative for the company. And then you kind of have also time, right? So like this is a protected thing that can kind of grow organically. And then if it works, then you start to add another salesperson to it. You start to become more efficient and so forth. So this works really, really well because you're already probably data-driven. You have already user engagement data, and making this visible to whoever is coming into the company afterwards is probably not that hard because you probably already have data scientists that have been with the company for 3 to 4 years. This is why this is so much easier for these companies to do. So, you go up market from this lower segment. So now here's the funny stuff. If you try to do this the reverse way, what it means is usually you're very good at acquisition. You're very, very good at acquisition. If you have a running pipeline, you probably know how to sell really well. So you're pretty good at that. But it is fascinating to me with how little engagement data this can be done. And this is interesting because imagine you have a sales department of 30 SDRs. And now I'm coming and I'm saying, okay, we're going to make a self-serve version of your product or trial. Let's see, like some paid kind of trial. And the first leads are coming in. And then I'm going to tell them, guys, these trials that are coming in, these leads, you're not allowed to touch them because we need to wait before they're qualified. Because if we don't, then this entire exercise is completely useless. And then you're cooked. So you're telling 30 people now in sales, sit tight, do not touch these leads. Don't do anything with it. And then they're looking at you and they're like, are you crazy? We're generating leads. You're threatening our revenue because they're afraid now that they lost some people, like in the trial funnel and so forth, and they want to actively grab them. So you need to make sure that whatever your deal flow is, that it is actually bigger than what sales can work through, because otherwise you make this entire exercise useless. And that is a big trip. This is the first big trip mine. The second one is that normally, and I don't mean this in an accusatory way, but sales-led companies do not know how to create great products. And the reason for this is that sales-led companies have perfected to create products that sell well, and product-led growth companies have products that retain well. And the reason for this is very simple. There's 2 reasons for it. If you've ever been selling something, and I highly recommend to anyone to do this at some point in your life, you're sitting in a meeting, there's this 10 million ACV. If I'm going to close this, everybody's going to love me in the company for the next 3 years. And they want a feature that we don't have. What do? You go straight back to Leah and you tell her, Leah, we need this particular feature, then we can close this deal. This happens all that time. And this particular flow of feedback is very acquisition driven. If we just had this, then we could close the account. But it's not really customer success driven, because the customer success agent that does not have this kind of quota that is telling you like, like we have some customers that are unhappy, they need different features, right? Like they're starting to be annoyed, like they're not retaining well. This is not a replacement for good engagement data and tracking inside of a product, because a lot of the customers that you have that do not like your product on a longer term will not tell you unless you measure it, unless you go and you say like, hey, something is wrong. So these two things are definitely something that you need to make sure of. So you need to have more deal flow than sales can handle, and you need to learn how to do product. And that is a big ask for a lot of sales-led companies, because it also means that you're not just creating, this is the other thing, right? They think that, okay, now we're putting it in the backlog and then at some point it's done. What I'm asking you to do with product-led growth is you start to have a new dedicated team that is not generating revenue for the next 6 to 12 months for something that you cannot even touch. And these friction points are not a lot of fun. But that's what makes this so difficult. And I've written an entire guide on this. Like, so how should we approach this as a sales-led company? How do you bring product-led growth into the company without risking everyone, you know, and your entire revenue? But yeah, I would say that's a good summary.
Your take sounded super spicy, but then as you explained it, it actually sounds really reasonable. It's just saying, you know, if you're focused on acquisition before value, then like retention is going to suffer. And PLG companies, because they've chosen this like self-serve path as their starting go-to-market motion, had to focus on retention and had to focus on value first, as opposed to purely thinking about acquisition. So I love that point. I do want to get to some of the questions that are piling up here in the chat. Maybe Will, we can jump to you if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Sure. So my question is basically, in my experience, to do product-led growth really well, you have to have a lot of buy-in from engineering to do a lot of engineering work, both on just making the product retain well, as I really liked how you said that, but also the actual infrastructure to be able to do all of that, to handle the billing and all the, you know, actual sort of non-product pieces as well. What's your experience with getting that buy-in? How do you build that consensus with that side of the org?
Really love this question, because I have another first principle that I'm not violating in any way, and that is you cannot run product-led growth in a company that is directive. And it's exactly for what you just said, right? So like we need to have buy-in from engineering. We need to have buy-in from the product managers also that are doing stuff, and from the growth managers, of course. So it is extremely hard to give goals that make sense to you as an individual, also in a cross-functional team, if you are not on the ground finding out about these problems yourself. So a lot of growth work is it's iterative optimizations about some problems that we already know about, right? So like it's very rarely that you have like this big throw and then, you know, like, we're going to make another 3 million here, and then we're going to make another 3 million here. And this kind of optimization flow, as you become more repeatable in what you deliver, makes it almost impossible to go with someone that thinks they are a genius at the top of a company and then they just execute. And that means on the other hand, that you need to have cross-functional teams. And these cross-functional teams are as close to the customer as is possible. And I love this kind of framing of the problem in a way that before you bring growth into a company through a team, make your product teams, along with sales, more growth-minded. And what I mean with that is that you start to make it good practice in the company to measure and incentivize on intelligent goals, which are very outcome driven. So that's also a very specific exercise that we usually have. So instead of like just targeting revenue or feature deliveries, we try to make sure that we are targeting something that is delivering customer success. So the amount of recommendations that you have, or if you're going to go more into a sales-driven environment, how fast that specific accounts are doing something, or whatever it is. But you try to kind of doing it in a way that is detached from revenue, but it's very highly correlative with revenue through the customer success that we have. And in what I just said in too many words is that engineers deserve to be as close to the customers as you can. And that also means that sales cannot protect their leads against engineers joining the call, you know, like listening and doing research also with prospects and so forth. because that's another problem that we see oftentimes, that the sales pipeline is so well protected that you're not allowed to talk to anyone where you could potentially make money. And that is kind of a problem, because we want to talk to the people who would potentially give us money. And but again, I think engineering and product and design as well, by the way, they belong together in this, and they need to be extremely close. And the way that I do it in my companies was always that I give them a lot of freedom to come up with their own goals, a lot of freedom, as long as it makes sense and it is dependent on their own research. I'm less inclined, or like I'm less interested in the kind of numbers that you're pushing, but how good the substantiation is for what you are suggesting to do. And that means you need to do a lot of homework. But yeah, engineers love that, and PMs do as well, and designers as well, because it is their homework. It is their achievement as well afterwards. I hope that answers your question.
That was awesome.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Monique, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Cool. So we're at a really interesting stage at the moment with regard to our product-led mission. So we are a startup in the insurance space, quite a complex platform. It's a low-code platform specifically targeting builders in the insurance space, a lot of more technical people than non-technical people. So we are in the process of implementing a product-led motion to our fully sales-led motion to this point in time. And I think my question that I have is where best to start after you've gotten buy-in, you've made your business case, you've pitched it to the business, leadership has bought in. We have multiple different missions running at the moment, and we are a very small team because we're a startup. So it's very difficult to understand what the next step should be. Like, for example, we're currently revamping our website to improve our messaging and make it clearer what we're selling. We're running experiments around self-sign-ups to actually check how many customers want to go through the demo channel versus the self-sign-up channel. We're busy implementing Mixpanel and integrating that also with HubSpot so we can get more data to the sales team. Data tracking is not something that we've inherently done, so it's something very new to us, and we want to make sure that we get that right. Solving onboarding, making sure that our tooling is self-help enabled and gets clients to value quickly. So there are so many bits and pieces that we're currently trying to pull together into a product-led sales motion. I want to make sure that the next step that we're taking after we get buy-in is impactful and the right first step to take. What would you recommend?
So you are sales-led right now. How much revenue do you make? Roughly?
That is a great question.
So are you
I'm not
making
sure if I
15?
can share.
No, you don't have to. But like, are you making more than 15 or less than 15?
$1 million.
Okay, so less. Okay,
Oh,
so when you
yes.
are this kind of young, and you are still in this product market fit stage, it can actually be quite dangerous to start to toy with your distribution, with your distribution in this way. Specifically now, you said that you are, which is also very typical, right? So like you said that, oh, we are toying with our messaging on the website and so forth. So let me just give you the rough, I have always just tried to do it in a kind of a 5-step process on how I do it, with an increasing risk of as you go along, because you can start to do product-led sales and also product-led growth, depending on what you want to do, in a way that you're not risking everything, especially like right now, because you have a very limited bandwidth and you cannot tackle everything at the same time. So what can you do? Like, how can you start, and how should you start with product-led sales as a sales-led company? Always comes down to the same thing. Think about how would you tackle this as an advisor, because this is what I do as a main job, right? Like, I advise companies on how to do this. The very, very first thing that we do is we create a common understanding in the company on leadership on what we have. And it sounds stupid. What we're talking about here is an honest inventory on what works with what we have and what does not work that well. Now, if you have a value proposition where you're not just like optimizing a little bit, but you're still trying to kind of find it, and you're still trying to find product market fit, because you can still have $1 million revenue, but you're still kind of like, you're trying to find your ICPs. I think the next step, and this is super important, is you kind of need to figure out how confident are you that you have really found your ICPs? Do you really, really know who your ICPs are? Because especially as you are new, it is possible that 90% of your revenue is actually not coming from your ICPs. And what I mean with that, specifically for sales-led companies, you know how it is, right? Like you can pull the trigger on a 250K ACV that absolutely does not fit your core mission, but hey, they wanted to pay it, or so we're just gonna get it, right? And that is kind of dangerous because it kind of suggests as well a little bit that you're already you're marching with big steps towards product market fit, but all you've proven is that you can actually close a bigger deal. That does not mean that they retain over the next 2 to 3 years. That does not mean that you can actually scale this area in any way. So finding these ICPs doesn't matter whether you're product-led growth or whether you're sales-led, it doesn't really matter. Finding these ICPs is extremely important. And you kind of need to make sure, and this is the same as when you try to do strategy in companies, you can kind of check this by going to the different leaders in your company and say, so who are our ICPs? Be specific. And if you hear the same through everywhere, then you are aligned. And then you still have to test whether it kind of works. The next step that you would then do is you try to implement tracking towards these ICPs. And that is very easily said, but actually quite hard to do. And what I mean with that is that, so for instance, you're integrating right now Mixpanel. That alone is taking quite a long time to get going, right? Like we're starting to get some events in, then we need to kind of define, okay, what matters to us and whatnot. We start to gather data. You said that you didn't gather data so far, so there's also no historical data that you can analyze in some way. So now we need to start to measure everything, but now we also need to make sure, can we actually identify our ICPs in the pool of data that we have? Because whatever you're going to do from that step forward should only apply to your ICPs and not to your entire data set that you have. Because if you look at retention or activity in your product, whatever you want to do with your self-serve motion, and you cannot separate from your ICP and the noise that you have from the outside, it starts to become really difficult to get this going in the first place. Do you know what I mean, right? Like it starts to become very difficult if you don't know how to identify who the most important customers are. There are so many companies out there that started with like, okay, look, these are our 100 best customers. And then they started to notice, but there are 2 in there, in this particular set of these hundreds, that are retaining like crazy. And then they started to shift the entire product and actually got rid of the 98 other ones and then started to scale. That happens quite often. And it does not have to happen all the time, but getting your ICPs is probably more important right now. And this is something that you're already doing with the website before you do anything else. And then you get the tracking in place, and then you can start to think about implementing. So I would say, just from I don't know your product, of course, but from being very far away from it, I would say it is maybe a bit early to just come with the PLG hammer. Figure your current distribution out. Enrich it if you can. If it works, sure, that's fine. But I think you have other problems right now. I won't go that far.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's one of the other things on the list to do, but it makes a lot of sense to do that first and actually lay the foundation and then make informed decisions, specifically targeting the ICPs and solving their problems.
Yeah, and I think so it already takes a super long time to get data going, right? So like tracking the right stuff, implementing it, launching it, and then also having some, but then also comes the other problem. So what do we do now with this data? Just surfacing data, and POCUS is good at this, right? But like just surfacing data to salespeople so they understand it is a challenge in itself. That's going to take you another 3 to 6 months until you have something that they can actually use. And then comes the question, can they use it? So yeah, I'm feeling with you, but it is a difficult question for an early stage. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
I think we have just enough time for one question. And I really like Brittany's question here. I was thinking about this. We talk about self-serve and PLG kind of interchangeably, but as a sales-led growth company, are there other ways to become more PLG? I'm thinking about things like interactive demos. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I wrote a piece on this relatively recently, and I'm going to also write a relatively big one on interactive demos. No company wants to become product-led growth. That's never the purpose. That is the method to do something else. So why do you want to become more product-led as a sales-led growth company? It's because you want to match the expectations that the market has towards you in a better way. And it's also a better way to work, by the way, right? Like it's much more fun to know more about your customers, and just because you can serve them better. So what we see right now is a lot of demand from sales-led growth companies on how they do interactive demos. Pocus, by the way, also is doing interactive demos. Zendesk is doing an absolutely fantastic job with interactive demos. So what we're talking about here is we're talking how can we give to the customer relatively fast, more transparency towards the experience on how it feels to use your product. And this kind of time is measurable. So it's not just about that I don't want to talk to a salesperson somewhere else. It is really about, it takes time to book someone. Even if you assume that somebody does not mind whether they talk to a person or whether they do something that is on your website. But this time to value and the value in a sales-led growth company is usually, did you know whether this is something that is in your potential future? This kind of time is highly indicative whether you're generating long-term value with it. This is knowledge that we have from B2C markets, and it also applies to B2B companies. So if you wow someone with an interactive demo that is really good, and you don't have to pretend that it is the full product, then this is also an optionality that you have. Other than that, if you feel like that you can go and do a trial first, because trials are easier to structure than freemiums. Been writing an article on this, on a company that was straight jumping to freemiums, and they completely wrecked their revenue. And then now they kind of circled back to trials. Do it step by step, one thing after the other. A good product that is good for trials is already far, far better than just jumping into freemiums without knowing what you're doing.
Well, these 45 minutes have gone by so quickly. Leah, thank you so much for sharing your insights. I think one of my big takeaways from our chat has been kind of breaking things down to like the foundations and really asking yourself why at every moment, and doing things in this kind of like structured way where you're not just jumping to, I want to be PLG, it's what everyone's doing, and I'm gonna like go for it and start a freemium. Instead, doing it piece by piece and really taking the time to, look at your assumptions and really like be very critical about them. So thank you so much for joining us today. Where can people find your content? Where can they connect with you after this chat?
You can visit me on LinkedIn, or you go to my website, which is leahtharin.com. So my name just together, then .com. And maybe the stuff that is relevant for most of you is my guide on product-led sales, or like product-led growth for sales-led companies, because I describe everything there in detail. And I would love to hear back from you also if you have any criticism, something that is unclear. I'm very happy to engage with you.
Awesome. And yeah, if you're not already subscribed to Leah's newsletter on Substack, you got to do it. It's awesome. It's the one of like very few that I read every week.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Leah. And thank you everybody from the community for joining us today. Really appreciate everyone's time and your awesome questions. Until the next AMA, thank you everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for having me. Bye, everyone.